Clubhouse.
Welcome back to our Day 3 coverage of the 12th season of ATX TV Festival. This is Paul.
This is Caroline.
We kicked off our third morning with a conversation with Ted Danson and Mary Steenburgen, a married couple in Hollywood's elite that has lasted since the mid-90s. What was it, 25 years, they said? 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
He is in his mid-70s. She admitted to being just 70. So they had prior relationships. They mixed families. They told us that when they got together, they had 4 teenagers in the house at the same time, and they made that sound like a dream come true.
They definitely had their PTSD about those days, I would say. I loved these two together. I did not know very much about Mary's personality outside of acting. Ted, I want him to be a cool guy. I had seen him at the Cheers reunion. I felt good about him. But Mary was really a surprise to me because I feel like the roles that I associate her with, like, say, Parenthood or even Step Brothers or stuff like that, I feel like she always kind of plays this frazzled mother, this like kind of, she always kind of has this higher pitched voice and she always seems kind of rattled and whatever. And she just was the polar opposite to that. She seemed so grounded, very talented, very like full of creative ideas. And the sense that I got about her was like she was very independent. She was very singularly focused on a lot of the stuff that she wanted to do creatively. And that was beautiful to me because it turned out that Ted was very much more the fussy one over the two of them, or the worrier of the two of them.
Yeah, she seemed much more at ease with herself at this stage in their life. Both of them, actually, whether or not you know it, have kept very busy. If they have time off in their IMDb credits, I have a sense it's because they didn't want to work, not because they couldn't find it.
Right.
You may not know, but she was in Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, a very recent season of that. She looks like she does sub in during Ted's shows, so she has credits on both Mr. Mayor and The Good Place for single episodes. But she still does movies. She was recently in Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley, the book club sequel. So she is just continuing to stay busy. There was a funny synergy with the Justified reboot because she played one of the villains in the final season of Justified.
Which is kind of wild now that I think about it, that she wasn't at the Justified reboot portion, because she could have been on stage just to kind of tie together the two series, you know, like that would have made sense to me, but I don't know, go figure. So one of the things that I loved that they were talking to us about was how they first met, and the whole concept that, oh my God, when they had their first dinner together, Ted had these hair extensions in, and when Mary was explaining it and she was like, he was so thrilled with his hair, and all I can think of, this is the most ridiculous human I've ever met. I loved it. I loved everything about these two and the way that they really got it. You know, Ted said repeatedly that gratitude is the key. I don't know. How did you feel when he said, I know she's another person, but not really?
It felt familiar. The things that go along with having a long relationship that is rooted in actual soul bonding feelings, you know, like normal people have, that we kind of don't always associate Hollywood couples with having.
I think especially if you're going to think Hollywood, you think the woman is going to be the like romantic and like the one who's going to be like just swooning or whatever. And she felt so much more like comfortable in her own skin is a really good way how you were describing just how comfortable she is. And he seemed so much more like he fawned over her. He worried about her. He was like constantly concerned. I love it. Someone asked about if they have any flaws because they were presenting as such this beautiful couple. Ted said, well, Mary says I'm a hypochondriac, but I just say I'm very interested in my body.
Right.
Like he actually, his personality is a little bit different than you would have thought. he wasn't just like this Sam Malone, hey, you know, like playboy kind of guy. He had all these little foibles and all these little things. Like I could almost hear him be like, could you look at this little spot right here? Do you see this? Like, you know, like I could almost hear him being like worried about little things. And certainly she is by far the risk taker. She wants to start this entire music venture, which she's already doing, but she wants to continue it. And every time she like takes the next step, he's like panicked that it's going to go wrong. And I don't know if he's worried for her, like that the lack of a successful thing would upset her or something. I don't know, but there's definitely worry there for sure.
They were just very charming. We've had the opportunity to see other couples on stage. A few years ago, Katie Seagal and Kurt Sutter interviewed each other, and that was a 100% different vibe. You know how they say couples complete each other by sort of being foils, I guess, for different aspects of their personalities that may be stronger or weaker, or maybe that's not the right way to characterize it, but you understand what I mean.
No, totally. Like when I was just saying that Mary's a risk taker and then turns out Ted's the worrier. Like they were sort of the yin and the yang.
So Kurt and Katie, they seemed like further apart, like almost combative in certain ways. Like
I would say passionate, but definitely could go either way. Passionate good and passionate bad.
Yes.
Like
yes.
I swear to God, at one point, didn't he pick her up like over his shoulder? I don't know what I'm remembering. I'm remembering some sort of physical, like picking her up.
Well, I have a picture of
other people picking each other
yeah.
up.
Well, those two being involved with the guy who played Opie. Remember,
there was
Kurt
also picking
jumped
up there.
on Ryan Hurst's back. And surprised
Because
him.
that's the kind of stuff that happens at ATX,
Yeah.
just in the lobby when you're walking by and you're like, did that just happen? Did they just piggyback in the lobby?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, yeah, that just happened.
The creator of Sons of Anarchy jumped on a Son of Anarchy.
That's funny. So overall, I mean, what was your favorite part, or what was your takeaway from the Ted and Mary? Because I mean, I think people would say like, why do I want to go to a panel called like a conversation with like Ted and Mary? Like, what even is this? Why are these interesting?
I mentioned a second ago, they are a long-running couple in a profession and a part of the world where that is a huge anomaly. And the fact that they are in old age and they are still robustly working and getting along so well. If you need something to just give you a little hope for your fellow human beings, stuff like that might do it.
I loved that we can end it on this one, but I love that one of their big reasons why they get along so well is that they both love fart humor. They said, Mary said at the end of the day, they both have like the same sense of humor as like a 12-year-old boy. And because of that, they can just be silly and laugh about things and just be good.
That's great. After we finished with Ted and Mary, just a second for Nosh, and had to go get in line for a panel called Launching a Pod, parentheses cast, parentheses mpany. So launching a podcast company.
Got it. Okay, so we're going to have a couple little comments on this one, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it at all. This was one of those times when you really rely on the festival or the con to accurately title and summarize what a panel is going to be about. So of course, since we're podcasters, we are curious about what other people would suggest to do to launch a company, because we're just curious about like what are tips and tricks. What the panel turned out to be is a fellow podcast company called Podco, who was going to be having a new podcast coming out. So they were launching their company's newest podcast,
Of which they already had like
5, I think.
5.
So then that's what this was about. Now, because this wasn't what we expected at all, and because it was revealing itself in real time to be not what we expected, there was a lot of looking around in the room. Like, I'm a little confused. I don't really know why we're here. We had met other podcasters or hopeful podcasters in lines, and they were also in the room, and they were looking at us, and we were looking at them like, this isn't what we expected.
Well, the punchline, this was a company founded on cashing in on the current trend of established TV actors going back and revisiting their work in a podcast form for nostalgia. Like, this was the cornerstone of what Podco is trying to do in its initial phases, which is nostalgic podcasting.
And if you guys want to learn more about that, definitely go check out the virtual pass. But for us, it definitely made us very aware of titling and summaries of like what the panels are, because we probably would have chosen to go to something else and just learn about this information later, that there was going to be like a new podcast out. That would have been fine. But we like kind of used up like a whole section of our time. So it was very hard to impress us at that point because it wasn't what we expected. So that was just one of those live and let learn, you know, you learn, you live, you learn, you know, okay. So not every panel is for everyone. And that particular one was more of an advertisement for a product that they were going to be putting out. Totally cool, totally fine, just not what we expected.
From there, we finally did get that little piece of snack that we wanted. And
got a little more dill pickle popcorn.
And we split off, where Caroline went back, I believe, to watch some virtual panels back in the room. And I went to take some pictures in person at the panel for a show called From. From is a show that nobody knows about because it was on a network called Epix, which nobody had. And now Epix has changed its name to MGM Plus.
Wow.
Which has more name recognition, but I still think the same amount of people know about it.
It's funny because since you've been watching it and since it was at the festival, and then last night I was at my parents' house and they leave their like TV on all the time and it has like a screensaver, and it was going through like all these different like pictures of shows, and From stayed on the screen for like, I swear to God, like half an hour. So when you say no one's heard of it, I'm like, my God, it's all in my face. But you're right. It is like a little known show, but boy, it is creepy. If you guys are scaredy cats like me, I have to leave the room. I didn't even go to the panel because I cannot be a part of this. It's too scary for me.
Some of the seeds, so the kernels of what got the show going creatively, have a lot in common with Lost. And there was some of the same personnel, not J.J. Abrams, not Damon Lindelof, but other people that were there at the beginning of Lost also helped form From. And so this panel featured a man named Jack Bender, who was a heavyweight directing on Lost. I think he directed like half of them. And he is now the primary director or supervising director for From, as well as an executive producer. And they also had the lead actor, Harold Perrineau. He was Michael on Lost. He was in the Matrix trilogy. He was in a show called Oz as kind of the main character. And he has had a long and terrific career. Now he is playing, finally, the lead on his own show. And the underpinnings are very much like Lost, except it's not so broad as Lost, where it's like there's all these diverse people stuck in this spot and there's a mystery, and the mystery has to do with, what was it, the energy that controls the world, or whatever the mystery was at the end of the show. This is same kind of idea, except it's centered around a town, and it's all these people get stuck in this town. And instead of having a diverse cast of wondering what Sun and Jin and Saeed and Jack and Sawyer, this is more focused on a family that we meet that gets stuck in the town. And so
kind of schmigadoon.
Most of the story, although we meet other characters and learn their backstories and things, we're kind of going through it with this family.
That makes sense. I mean, that's a pretty well-known, right, fish out of water kind of narrative device there.
But this one has monsters that come out at night, and if you aren't indoors at night,
dude, I think on my parents' TV they were showing a picture of one of the monsters' faces, like behind Harold, and I had to stare at that freaking thing's face for like 30 minutes. It maybe desensitized me. Maybe I can watch it now.
I think they said that they shoot this in like Halifax.
Yeah.
So kind of a location most people they don't think of when they think of shooting. And so they need a cast for not extras, but they're the monsters, because the monsters are people. You see that in the first 5 seconds of the first episode. And so that you might be thinking of the poster of a man with a very broad smile, and that is the second season poster for From. And they talk about him. They called him Smiley, and he was just sort of one of those extra actors just from the local Halifax casting company that stood out amongst all the rest of them. The director kept saying, come do this, come do that. And when they needed finally sort of like a featured bad guy, eventually they came and asked Smiley to do it because he stood out. And there was no other reason. They didn't bring him in. He wasn't like an LA ringer or something like that. And so they had little stories like that, and they brought some clips, and yeah, it was a great little panel that was very focused, and it was cool to see both of those guys close up.
That's awesome. And I know you took a lot of great pictures of that one too, so people can go check those out.
Harold Perrineau liked my my Instagram post on that, so there we go.
There you go.
There we go. Actually, going back to Mo Ryan from yesterday.
She retweeted you.
She retweeted me, and because my picture, I caught like Javier making like a kind of like a funny Mr. Furley sort of like point with his finger, and then had Melinda Shue Taylor sort of chuckling at that, and Mo doing something else. So she made some comment that they look like the cast of a sitcom or something.
Yeah, it looked like a sitcom still, like the opening credits where everyone's like, ah, ha, ha, ha.
Yeah.
Like they're all together, yeah.
And so all of Mo's followers and friends liked it, and that was kind of cool too.
Oh, I love it.
All right, so from there I went to the Jack Bender specific micro panel where they just talked to Jack Bender.
So let's talk about what a micro panel is. So most of these panels are roughly an hour, unless they're going to be like one of the big events of the night. The big events of the night tend to be about 2 hours. But these micro panels that they offered up this year were about 30 minutes. And, you know, I'm not sure. I feel like they were trying to get in a little bit more content without having to like allot so much extra time or too much extra in like a room or whatever. So this was an interesting approach that I've not really seen. Have you seen this at other cons where they do sort of like a little micro something for like 30 minutes?
Just last year at ATX.
Okay, so this is fairly new. So, what do you think about this idea of like taking a subject and just giving it 30 minutes instead of like a full hour?
I saw it both ways. Like you and I were done with that podcast one. But then the Jack Bender one,
You wish it had gone on?
it feels like we could have gotten some more deets from Mr.
Yeah.
Bender.
Well, and that's an important thing is like sometimes, the micro panel concept works if you have just like a small snippet of thing like for the podcast thing. It was fine because the whole point of it was not really to ask them any questions, not really to get any information. It was just to make an announcement. 30 minutes was plenty of time to make an announcement. And so then when we had like this other one, like you're saying, you're doing this interview kind of style where you want more answers and stuff, 30 minutes seems like it goes so fast. Just by the time the moderator introduces them, gives some background, starts the first question, you're already like 5 minutes in, and it's like, there's just not that much time left. Another question about the way that they were handling panels and like audience questions. What did you think about them doing it with the index cards this year where you could like write out a question if you had one in advance and like give it in, and then the moderators just had the questions up there. Like they didn't have any lineup at a microphone. There was none of that business in most of the bigger ones. There's only one that I watched virtually where it seemed they handed around the microphone and it went off the rails.
Well, we've seen where people want to make a personal connection with the person on stage. They're holding 500 people hostage while they talk about this meaningful story about how watching the show with their stepdad meant so much, but then he got the cancer, and it's like, this is a meaningful story, but I'm sorry, come on, this is a very limited time for you to wind up asking, what's your favorite memory from making the show? Like,
well, it's hard because for so many people, this is their big moment, right? Like, and because we don't have the classic con setup where you can pay to like go and stand at their table and get their autograph, that's when you would normally tell your little story. You wouldn't have to stand in front of an audience worth of people to give your heartfelt, why this show was so important to you moment. Most of the time, those are done at tables, but because ATX doesn't have that meet and greet kind of thing, you do get subjected to someone getting up to the microphone and being like, Gilmore Girls was my most important thing I ever had in my life. I've named my children Lorelai and Luke, and all this stuff where you're like, oh my gosh, what is your question? Because they'll just keep talking.
We've seen where moderators get up and say, just a reminder, questions do not begin with I. And
they start with who, what, where, why. Yep.
Right.
Yep. They do that whole thing, which I never have an issue with when they do that. The problem is no one ever gives a hoot about that. When they get up to the microphone, they're like, I. And you're like, oh no, oh no. So, I mean, in that one virtual panel, and it was, I want to say it was, I think it was one of the Beyond the Page ones. Like, I mean, the person in the audience was being a little bit insulting to the panelist in what he was wanting to talk about. It may have even been AI, to be fair. I'm not exactly sure which one it was. It got dicey. Like, the audience was even like, sit down or ask your question. And it was like, whoa. So me personally, I'm fine with them moving over to this index card format.
Yeah, well, they have a code of conduct for attending. And
sure.
We have heard of people violating it and getting removed. Not exercising the kinds of manners that your mother would want.
Again, because there's so much access at ATX and you do have all this opportunity to interact with people, the be cool rule is very important to keeping everything going very smoothly.
Yeah, so Jack Bender gave a half an hour just a history on himself, where he began as an actor all the way back for Danny Thomas, advanced from there to directing, and described that process a little bit, talked a little bit about how his involvement with From came to be, because that's what he's working on now and what he's proud of right now and wanted to talk about. He did have a little comment about the recent Vanity Fair article that was an excerpt from a chapter in Mo Ryan's Burn It Down book, where she talks about the Lost writers' room. And, you know, he comes from Lost. That's one of his big credits. But he wanted to make sure that we knew that there were two sides to the production. There was what was happening in Hawaii, which was production, and then there was what was happening in LA, which was the writer's room. So the strife that was described in the book was writer's room stuff.
In LA,
and he was purely production. He was always in Hawaii shooting or doing something with the directors of the other episodes that he didn't shoot. Like we said with Mo, kind of that forlorn, I wish I'd known sort of look on his face, you know, kind of thing. Because he's been in the business long enough for Danny Thomas to have been the guy that hired him originally. You know, that's a pretty long freaking time. He was like, he was old enough to have been a prospective boyfriend for Sally Struthers on All in the Family.
Wow.
So by the time Lost came around, he was a mature guy in the industry. You know, he'd already been in it for 30 years, 40 years, whatever. So, yeah, he just wanted to kind of say a little bit and then say nothing else about it. And that's how he went about it.
Which is kind of fair, right? I mean, because really, what could he speak to if he wasn't there? You know, if he wasn't in the writer's room, he shouldn't speak to that part. So, you know, it's always exciting, though, to hear people's careers like that. And I'm glad that they did give him that extra 30 minutes to just like sit and talk just about things that he's done.
He looked very directory, you know, because it was Austin. It's 106,000 degrees outside, but he's wearing a scarf.
Oh.
Yeah. So
what was it? That was an accessory. That wasn't for the weather.
Well, but he had like the rest of it was like a black, like mock turtleneck with black pants and then some sort of little cardigan on top of that. So very like
very creative.
When the Hollywood people come to Austin, they are, even if you don't know who they are, you can still pick them out. You know,
they typically are highly stylized, like, and that doesn't mean like they're not, it's like not wearing like a beaded gown, but they're highly stylized.
They're not wearing Levi's and Izod t-shirts. No
one was at all.
But you don't understand what I mean, though. Like,
yeah, they're highly stylized.
There's
like
a quality about the way they look.
Everything that you see had a stylist like choose it for them. I was commenting on a man's shoes to you that I was like, you can tell so much about him because his shoes matched the suit perfectly, and it was this color blue that you could not find in like the natural world. So it was like,
I don't sort of a robin's egg, but
not even. It was like a sky blue sort of. I don't know. I can't even describe it exactly. But the thing is, I swear to God, those shoes were dyed to match.
Did you get a look at the guy though? I mean, he couldn't have bought that off the rack.
No,
He had
I'm
this
saying.
gigantic barreled chest, and these. I mean, it was like this. Yeah, this big dude. He was
No, very tall, very tall.
but also like Gastoni in the way that he was built.
Oh,
you
okay.
know.
Well, okay, sure. He looked fit and strong for sure.
Yes. So, like I said, stylized. Like you said, stylized.
Yeah, but like that
not off
whole
the rack.
thing was like custom made for him, and
Right.
it was very apparent because it fit him like, to a T.
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, also fun people watching you guys, always cool. And some of you guys might wonder, like, well, what do I wear to ATX? If this is what people are wearing, what do I wear? So there's a smattering of things. You can absolutely wear jeans and t-shirts. That was 100% acceptable fun. If you want to, like, up the ante a little, there were some sundresses and some cowgirl boots and little things like that. But the nice thing about it is that for the most part, super casual, very relaxed atmosphere. You can be cute about what you're wearing, or you can be a little like sassy about what you're wearing. But for the most part, anything goes. And that's nice because, again, this isn't a cosplay event, just to be clear. I never have seen anyone wearing anything that I would consider cosplay.
No.
Which is important because you would have no idea if you were just coming along and thought, oh, I'm going to bring all my stuff to be, my cosplay outfit.
Most I've done was I intended on catching Taylor Kitsch one day, and so I wore my Dylan athletic department number 33 t-shirt so that when I asked for an autograph, he wouldn't say I'm too busy. He'd see the 33 and be like, all right, fine, which is exactly what happened.
Yes, very true. So, but overall, wearing a Dylan t-shirt isn't the same thing. You didn't come in a football uniform with pads and a helmet.
Yeah.
Okay. But other people could think that would be cool. And I'm saying this is not that event.
There are autograph hounds, and when I see them at this event, I am kind of like I don't want to say turn my nose up a little bit, but I'm like, you're in the wrong place,
Well, because again, you're not paying for it. I mean, you mentioned asking.
Yeah.
You mentioned asking for an autograph. That's pretty rare. I mean, we walked right next to plenty of celebrities, and we don't typically ask them for anything at all. In fact, we just smile and treat them like regular old people. So it is very unusual actually to like ask for one. I mean, I bet you can count on one hand how many people you've ever gotten an autograph from for all these years at this festival, because it's just not really what this festival is about. It's really about bringing the audience, the industry, and the talent together in a way that makes you feel more like we're all a group together, instead of like, why would we be asking them for autographs? Do you know what I mean? Like, we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm. So our final event for the evening was the Righteous Gemstones presentation, which, man, that was really cool because they put it in ACL, Austin City Limits, which, we've been to ATX several years, and the big venue used to be the Paramount Theater, but they would have us line up outside of the Paramount Theater right before they needed us to come in. We got to walk right in, which was pretty cool. They showed 2 episodes. They brought on John Goodman. They brought on Adam Devine, Cassidy Freeman, and Edie Patterson from the cast. They brought on Danny McBride, who is both cast and creative. They just had a great time on stage. Ben Travers usually gets the big event panel, and he got this one as well.
This panel was great because we had the smattering of the family. We had all the kids. We had their the dad, John, and I think that John was actually like a huge pull for a lot of the crowd. I mean, for one thing, they sold out ACL, so that's one thing that was like blowing them away, is that they actually sold out the venue for this event,
which Cheers did not.
Correct. And so that that tells you a lot about the show. If you haven't seen it yourself, you should definitely check out Righteous Gemstones. Hilarious.
It's on HBO.
Or I think we're supposed to call it Max now.
I can't keep up, and I should be able to keep up.
I don't think I'll be able to call it Max until we can call Peacock the Cock, and then once I can call it that, then I'm okay.
Right, we'll call Hulu Lou.
Yeah, we're just cutting off all the names,
Right.
and like let's do it all at once. I'm not gonna do this piecemeal. It's not for me, okay? No, I loved this panel because it was funny.
Very
it was
funny.
fast. It was just like the banter was like wild and crazy. And they had so many wild stories, which totally this is a virtual past kind of thing because their stories were graphic and definitely the type that you want to hear it from their mouths because they were so wild. But even still, because we watched 2 episodes and they had the musical act called Jane Leo, who sang the song that everyone loves from Righteous Gemstones, Misbehavin'. And that was funny and it was cute and stuff. I think that still by showing 2 episodes, which I was glad to have seen, again, we were only left with about 15 or 20 minutes by the time everyone got on stage. So it was fast and furious. I think Ben had like about 3 or 4 questions before we had to get into audience index card questions real quick. And then it was over. Like it was fast and furious.
But it was cool to see their personalities come out, you know, like Adam Devine is pretty much Adam Devine, but like Danny McBride, who you've seen play kind of Kenny Powers in everything you've seen him, you know, he aloof and sort of not exactly stoic, but he always has the same kind of character. But in person, he was actually, you know, commiserating with his friends, laughing and just acting like a normal person. Whereas he normally plays these guys that are very opposite to that. Edie Patterson, you know, she plays the daughter and on screen, she says and does pretty vile stuff. And it just reminded me of a quote someone had where they quoted Anthony Hopkins in terms of like, how do you become a great actor? And it was something like, don't be afraid to play the fool, I think is, what was it, Ryan Reynolds or somebody like that quoting Anthony Hopkins. And that's
a very funny duo.
These are well, he didn't get it firsthand from him. He just heard it from him someplace else.
Got it.
And
okay.
This cast is very much they buy into that. No, I don't think anyone more so than Edie Patterson, because her actual on stage persona where she had to kind of answer for her character, it wasn't, I won't say shame, but it was like
she was more reserved as a regular person,
maybe even a little
character.
Embarrassed because what she sees herself do on screen is highly dissociated from how she feels about herself, which is, I understand that's what acting is, but I think she was the furthest away.
I would agree with you, and she also seemed like, you know, she wanted to make an important point, which they didn't when they introduced her, that she is a writer on the show.
Yes.
And so that's a huge thing. Again, we can't spend X amount of years going to ATX talking about representation and diversity and then just gloss over the fact that Edie is a main writer and she's a woman in the writer's room. Like, this is important. We shouldn't ignore that part. And so a lot of the jokes, a lot of the like nastiest things that she says, she actually writes and then can be embarrassed herself to even say them. And she talked about that, about just like some of the lines are just so out there, which I say often when we watch the show. She has lines and jokes, and I can be a pretty nasty person when I want to say some pretty raunchy stuff.
It's true.
She says things and uses phrases and imagery, if you will, that I have never heard or seen. and I'm not a prude. It is so descriptive and so crazy and outlandish. And you're like, oh my God. So you know what? I give her massive props. And I'm so glad that she bothered to pause the conversation to say, P.S. I'm a writer on the show. Like, we shouldn't dumb it down in any way. Like, this is why I say the things I say, because I'm writing it, you know?
The other person on stage that I didn't mention was Jody Hill, who they didn't have any questions for, and he never said anything. But
I think that was just because of the quickness. Like, we just didn't have any more time left, you know?
He has traveled with Danny McBride on Eastbound and Down and Vice Principals and all of these projects. They have been partners together. So he's very much a part of, if you like those shows, he's part of the equation. We just didn't get to hear him say anything. And that was our night. We did go check out a funny little event called Are You Afraid of the Driscoll?
Well, actually, I'm going to back you up a little bit.
Please.
We had such a strange occurrence when we came out of the Righteous Gemstones because
it was raining.
We did not realize a storm had rolled in, like a full-on crazy lightning storm.
Thunder and lightning and everything.
It was nuts, you guys. And the venue tried to let us stay in there for a little bit, but after a certain point, I mean, their workers were done. Everyone needed to go home. Like, they didn't need to be there anymore. So they were like, everybody's got to get out. Like, I'm sorry that it's raining, but call your Ubers and get out of here. It was really surprising. That rain was torrential, and we ended up getting a chance to chitty chat with some older ATX attendees, Cheryl and Lynn, and they were super adorable. And again, just kind of reminded me, like, ATX is for all ages. Like, these ladies were probably in their late 60s, and they were definitely not savvy with like Uber and stuff like that. So we were like, please just ride in with us, come with us. And they were like, thank you, because for sure they did not know how they were going to get back. But they were so invested in the festival themselves. I don't know, it made me smile, because when I think about going to cons, sometimes I get a little bit sad because I look around and I feel like there's somewhat of an age cutoff. I know there's not, but a little bit there is. But with ATX, I feel like because they bring reunions like Cheers, where, you know, that played 40 years ago, you know, initially, then you have this sense of like, no, everyone belongs here. Like, you don't have to just be up on the latest shows or whatever is like pop culture, even within the last 10 years or something. We can reach back and enjoy like some of this great stuff. Having Norman Lear or James L. Brooks or stuff like that. I mean, there was so much that these ladies were getting out of this. It was like heartwarming to me that I'm like, I can keep going to ATX for like a really long time. I don't age out of here for like maybe 20 years or more, you know, which makes me really happy. We'll be at the sing-along singing, you know, Robin Sparkle songs at 65, and that makes me smile, you know, that's a possibility. So this is Caroline.
And this is Paul. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please leave us a 5-star rating so other people can find and enjoy the podcast as well.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. This has been an original Pod Clubhouse production. Pod Clubhouse is a podcast network dedicated to encouraging collaboration among podcasters and friends to bring a fresh voice and diverse perspective on a wide array of content. Please visit and leave a comment for us at podclubhouse.com. Rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast feeds on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us at Pod Clubhouse. Our DMs are always open, and we'd love to hear from you.